Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Let's start with the top stories that made headlines in the last week. The National Assembly has begun reviewing the Lee administration's budget proposal for next year. On Tuesday, President Lee Jae-myung laid out details of the plan at Parliament, calling for bipartisan support to boost spending on artificial intelligence as the country seeks new growth engines. South Korea's Defense Minister Ang Kyu-baek and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth held their annual security talks on Tuesday. While no joint statement was issued, the two discussed ways to further strengthen defense cooperation. During last week's APEC 2025 in Korea, one major win for the country's economy was Nvidia's agreement to directly supply 260,000 advanced GPUs to the South Korean government and several leading conglomerates. This comes as Korea aims to become one of the world's top 3 AI leaders. President Lee Jae-myung addressed the National Assembly on Tuesday morning, outlining his government's budget proposal for next year and calling for bipartisan support to usher in a new era of artificial intelligence. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
The focus of the 2026 budget proposal was on seeking new growth engines, with President Lee Jae-myung calling it the very first budget to open up the era of AI.
국제 무역 통상 질서의 재편과 인공지능 대전환의 파도 앞에서 국가 생존을 모색해야 할 절체절명의 위기에 처해 있습니다. 이제는 인공지능 시대의 고속도로를 구축해서 도약과 성장의 새로운 미래를 열어야 합니다.
The government has projected a record high of 728 trillion won, or over $508 billion for next year's budget, up 8% from this year. Nearly $7 billion has been earmarked for AI-related projects, 3 times higher than this year's spending, with a focus on physical AI and use of the technology in robots and automobiles. Next year's defense spending will be expanded by more than 8%, worth over $46 billion, with more use of AI by the defense forces, as the commander-in-chief called for self-reliant defense.
전 세계 5위의 군사력으로 평가받는 우리 대한민국이 국방을 외부에 의존한다는 것은 우리 국민의 자존심 문제 아니겠습니까?
Other areas of focus were on the R&D budget, which will be a record high, as well as the so-called National Growth Fund, NK Culture. He also vowed to secure a social safety net and help small business owners through local consumption coupons. And looking back on last week's diplomatic super week, the president said uncertainties over the economy have been eased by reaching a trade deal with the U.S. As the president called for across-the-aisle collaboration, speaking before a 2/3 full Congress, following a boycott by the main opposition People Power Party over an arrest warrant against its party member.
좀 허전하군요.
The mood was starkly contrasting as the ruling Democratic Party lawmakers responded to the president with rounds of applause. The legal deadline for the parliamentary budget review is set for December 2nd. Yoon Jung-min, 아리랑뉴스.
Thanks to strong exports, South Korea's current account remained in the black for September, and the Bank of Korea expects this positive trend to continue despite ongoing tariff pressures. Our financial correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
South Korea's current account surplus continued for the 29th month straight in September, driven by strong exports. The Bank of Korea announced Thursday that the preliminary current account surplus registered for the month stood at $13.47 billion, the largest for any previous September. This is also second highest monthly surplus for any month since the year 2000, and considering the surplus this year from January to September, it's the highest ever for the period, with $82.77 billion, about 23% higher than the same period last year.
The biggest factor here is the boom in semiconductor exports, as the industry has entered a super cycle. In non-IT items, while automobile exports to the U.S. have declined, the sector is performing well, supported by export diversification to Europe and other regions.
According to officials, this figure in September was driven by a $14.24 billion surplus in the goods account. Exports rose 9.6% from the previous year, while imports increased by 4.5%. Compared to the month before, it's up $4.84 billion. However, the services account deficit widened to $3.32 billion, larger than the previous month and the same month last year. This was partly because the transport balance swung to a deficit for the first time in 5 months. Looking ahead, the central bank expects the surplus to shrink in October due to fewer working days from the Chuseok holiday, but forecasts a return to a strong surplus trend for November and December. 김도현, 아리랑뉴스.
One of the key economic achievements from last week's APEC 2025 held here in Korea was Nvidia's agreement to directly supply 260,000 advanced GPUs to the South Korean government and 4 major conglomerates. For more on the deal's significance, its implications, and what it means moving forward, our economics correspondent Park Junan joins me in the studio. Welcome, Junan.
Thank you for having me.
To start us off, could you briefly explain the recent agreement on Nvidia GPUs and why it's considered such a significant deal for South Korea's AI ecosystem?
Of course, Sujin. So during this APEC CEO summit last Friday, Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang announced that the company will provide 50,000 advanced GPUs each to the South Korean government, Samsung Electronics, SK Group, and Hyundai Motor Group, along with 60,000 units to Naver Cloud. During the press briefing, Huang said, quote, "There's no question in my mind that Korea will build many more AI factories here, not just for the Korean industry, but also because Korea has a chance to be an AI hub for the region. And it has the ability to attract startups that are in other countries to be hosted on a Korea AI cloud." The company also projected that with the addition of 260,000 GPUs to the existing 45,000 here, bringing to the total to over 300,000, South Korea's AI infrastructure and development capacity could expand by as much as 15-fold. Let's take a listen to what Presidential Senior Secretary for AI and Future Planning Ha Jung-woo had to say about last week's chip supply deal.
Artificial intelligence, from large language models to physical AI, demands tremendous computing power for training, which is why the Nvidia GPUs will play a critical role. With 260,000 secured, South Korea now ranks among the global top 3, positioning us not just to build AI models, but to develop core AI technologies that drive innovation across industries.
Right, so the government says this puts South Korea among the top 3 global AI leaders, but what does that really mean in practice, and how does it boost the country's standing in the global AI race?
Right, Sujin. So although it might seem impressive to hold hundreds of thousands of GPUs, but it's natural to wonder what this number actually means and what they will be used for. For example, AI factories can be run to advance intelligent manufacturing and digital transformation. They could also be used to power AI-driven mobility and advanced robotics. The applications are broad and varied, and there's no doubt that NVIDIA's high-performance GPUs are essential for handling vast amounts of data and carrying out large-scale computations. Let's take a listen to what a professor who studies AI has to say about what it means to acquire NVIDIA's GPUs.
Since Nvidia holds nearly 90% of the global GPU market, high-performance GPUs, essential for advanced physical robots, can realistically only be sourced from Nvidia. With tens of thousands of GPUs operating like supercomputers, data centers are being built to support large-scale AI training. As more of these systems are established, we expect South Korea's AI ecosystem to grow exponentially.
Right, so obviously securing advanced chips is a big win for South Korea. Junan, are there any concerns about how these chips will actually be used, though?
Right, Sujin. So I actually spoke to an expert in the field of semiconductors, and what he told me is that there's a risk South Korea could end up having the computing power through chips, but not enough large-scale AI services or data to make full use of it. Let's take a listen.
Since South Korea doesn't have large platforms with hundreds of millions of active users like US big tech, it's uncertain whether the country can fully and efficiently utilize such massive GPU capacity. And while companies like Hyundai and Samsung may apply physical AI in manufacturing, it's still questionable whether each really needs as many as 50,000 units.
While he questioned their immediate applicability, he acknowledged that securing high-performance chips remains a decisive factor in the global race for AI leadership. Let's take a listen.
Since the 260,000 GPUs will be delivered gradually over several years, it could be feasible if companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and Naver, along with public institutions, keep updating and expanding their services as the chips come in.
Securing high-performance GPUs is certainly encouraging, but how they are used, for what purposes, and how effectively they are allocated will be a key factor shaping South Korea's future with AI.
All right, Chan, thank you so much for breaking that down for us today.
Always a pleasure.
The United States launched an intercontinental ballistic missile on Wednesday after President Trump called for resumption of nuclear weapons testing for the first time in more than 3 decades. In response, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered officials to draw up a proposal on restarting nuclear tests. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
Just 6 days after President Donald Trump urged the U.S. military to restart nuclear weapons testing, the U.S. on Wednesday fired a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile. According to the Air Force Global Strike Command, the unarmed nuclear-capable missile was launched from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. The rocket traveled around 6,860 kilometers, landing near the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Test Site in the Marshall Islands. This follows after Trump announced on social media just 1 hour before holding a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping on October 30th that he instructed the Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons testing. He did, however, hint at working on a joint denuclearization plan with Russia and China.
We did our nuclear. We're the #1 nuclear power, which I hate to admit because it's so horrible. We're maybe working on a plan to denuclearize the 3 of us, so we'll see if that works.
His remarks came during a Miami business forum and amid growing concerns about nuclear proliferation and strategic competition between the world's leading powers. No specific plan or details came out from the White House regarding his comments, though. Meanwhile, responding to the U.S., Russian President Vladimir Putin on the same day on Wednesday ordered his top officials to submit proposals on possible nuclear weapons testing. In a televised meeting with his Security Council, he said Moscow had always strictly adhered to the obligations not to do any tests, but it would do so if any other nuclear power had started.
Russia has always strictly adhered to its obligations under the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and we have no plans to withdraw from it. At the same time, as I stated in my address to the Federal Assembly in 2023, should the United States or other treaty signatories conduct such tests, Russia would be compelled to take appropriate reciprocal measures.
Russian Defense Minister told Putin that Washington's recent remarks clearly demonstrate active buildup of strategic offensive weapons, with the Chief of the General Staff adding Russia should respond effectively to such actions. To this, Putin asked all the ministries and relevant agencies to do everything necessary to collect additional information on this issue, analyze it, and draft proposals. Kim Bo-kyung, 아리랑뉴스.
South Korea's intelligence agencies offering new insight into Pyongyang's diplomatic movements, point to subtle shifts that indicate North Korea's preparation for potential dialogue with the United States. Our Moon Yeon has the details.
Though an anticipated U.S.-North Korea summit encounter at the APEC leaders' meeting ultimately failed to materialize, South Korea's spy agency says Pyongyang had been quietly positioning itself for the possibility. According to briefings delivered during the National Assembly's audit of the National Intelligence Service on Tuesday, North Korea showed multiple signs of preparing for potential dialogue with Washington behind the scenes, even as it remained publicly unresponsive to repeated overtures. The NIS confirmed indications that Pyongyang had been adjusting its diplomatic posture, including Kim Jong-un's deliberate restraint from making provocative remarks on nuclear armament, to avoid antagonizing the United States. The agency also cited North Korea's efforts to analyze the policy stances of U.S. officials handling North Korea affairs and to gather information on influential figures in Washington as evidence of quiet preparation.
Although the APEC-related summit did not happen, various channels have confirmed that North Korea had been preparing behind the scenes for dialogue with the United States. The NIS believes Kim Jong-un intends to engage in talks and will seek contact once conditions are met.
The agency also sees early next year as a potential turning point. With the South Korea-US joint military exercises scheduled for March, the NIS says that period could determine whether high-level talks, possibly even at a summit level, become feasible.
We expect and judge the possibility to be quite high that U.S.-North Korea relations could improve next year, even advancing to a summit-level meeting. After the 9th Party Congress, another military parade, and the joint exercises in March, there may be an appropriate moment to explore or sense the possibility depending on how circumstances unfold.
As for Kim Jong-un's health, long a subject of speculation, the NIS reported no major abnormalities, saying he appears to be carrying out both provincial and Pyongyang-based activities without difficulty. 문혜련, 아리랑뉴스.
South Korea's Defense Minister An Kyu-baek met with his U.S. counterpart Pete Hegseth for their annual security talks in Seoul on Tuesday. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has more on what was discussed.
The South Korean and U.S. defense chiefs reaffirmed the steadfastness of the ROK-US alliance during their annual security talks, the 57th Security Consultative Meeting on Tuesday. A joint communique was not released, waiting for a joint fact sheet for the two countries to come out first. Still, Defense Minister An Kyu-baek and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did share some parts of the discussion they had during the meeting. Regarding the nuclear-powered submarines, which Trump recently gave approval to, the Pentagon vowed support across its departments.
We're going to work closely with the Department of State and the Department of Energy to fulfill President Trump's commitment in a deliberate manner. And I think it's a reflection of something I said, that the president wants allies to be strong.
Noting that South Korea is a model ally, Hegseth said he was encouraged by South Korea's commitment to increase defense spending and make greater investments in ROK military capabilities. To modernize the alliance and boost ties, the two allies agreed on some practical steps, including having U.S. warships be repaired in South Korea to ensure their most lethal capability remains ready to respond to any crisis. As to whether the U.S. forces Korea could be used against China in the Taiwan Strait, U.S. Defense Chief underlined the importance of flexibility, but said the USFK is oriented to protect South Korea from the north.
There's no doubt, flexibility for regional contingencies is something we would take a look at, but we are focused on standing by our allies here and ensuring the threat of the DPRK is not a threat to the Republic of Korea, and certainly continue to extend nuclear deterrence as we have before.
The comment resonates with the two defense chiefs' earlier visit to the joint security area within the demilitarized zone on Monday for the first time in 8 years. Meanwhile, when asked about whether South Korea hopes to pursue nuclear weapons development, Minister An clearly said this was not possible.
South Korea is part of the NPT, so it's not allowed to have nuclear weapons. Therefore, developing nuclear weapons in South Korea would not be possible.
He further added that because South Korea cannot possess nuclear weapons, the Combined Nuclear and Conventional Integration System, integrating U.S. nuclear capabilities with South Korea's conventional weapons, has been established. Kim Bo-kyung, 아리랑뉴스.
As South Korea seeks to advance its surveillance capabilities over the weekend, it launched a final satellite of Project 425. This allows South Korean authorities to monitor North Korea around the clock with updated surveillance every 2 hours. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
2, 1, engines for power.
At Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket took off on Sunday carrying South Korea's fifth and last satellite under the 425 project. The satellite reached orbit after 14 minutes and established communication with a ground station about an hour later.
The 425 Project's 5th satellite was launched normally from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, settled into its target orbit, and successfully communicated with the ground station, confirming the satellite is in good condition.
With this launch, South Korea's independent surveillance capabilities have been significantly enhanced. The 425 project is a major milestone in South Korea's independent defense strategy. It consists of 5 satellites, 1 electro-optical and infrared satellite, and 4 synthetic aperture radar or SAR satellites. The EOIR satellite provides extremely high-resolution image but is limited by weather conditions. The 4 SAR satellites use radar to capture images, allowing them to conduct surveillance 24 hours a day regardless of cloud cover or darkness. This launch completes the constellation of satellites in an impressively short time frame. The first satellite, the EOIR satellite, was launched in December 2023. With this 5th launch, South Korea has successfully deployed its entire medium to large satellite network in less than 2 years. The first 3 satellites are already fully deployed. The 4th is undergoing its final operational evaluation. Once this 5th satellite is also fully tested, the system will be complete. Once all the satellites are operational, the South Korean military can monitor key targets in North Korea at intervals of approximately 2 hours. This significantly reduces the country's reliance on foreign intelligence assets. It directly enhances the kill chain preemptive strike system, a core pillar of South Korea's 3-axis defense. DAPA added that this is not the final step. It plans to further strengthen surveillance assets by developing a constellation of microsatellites in the coming years to eventually shorten the monitoring cycle over the Korean peninsula to as little as 30 minutes. Kim Do-yeon, 아리랑뉴스.
It's been about a month since South Korea officially joined the Hague Inter-Country Adoption Convention, an agreement designed to protect the rights of child adoptees. The government has also issued a public apology to those who have suffered in the past. With some adoptees still searching for their birth parents, our culture correspondent Park Gun-woo met one of them here in Korea.
Even after 5 decades, for some people, the search for their birth parents continues. 57-year-old Park Won-il, also known as Philip Peloshu, was sent to an orphanage in Korea just 3 days after birth and adopted at the age of 3. Although he says he grew up in a loving family in the US, Park said he sometimes faced difficulties.
I really didn't feel like I fit in. You know, Colorado at that time and even today I think is mostly Caucasian. You know, I kind of stood out like a sore thumb in that sense. So.
That's why he always wondered about its roots and has tried every possible means to find them.
All the DNA tests that I can, and then the other thing is I try to collect all the documentation I can. Got these pictures from the adoption agency, and these were pictures of me, you know, that were presumably sent to my adoptive parents, so that they could, you know, identify the child that they were getting.
During his search, he's managed to gather bits and pieces of information about his birth, including his name, assumed birthday, and even an address in Seoul of the custodian who sent him to an orphanage. While some pieces of information about him gave him hope, he says in most cases it ultimately led to nothing.
You get some pieces of information, you start getting your hopes up, and then it turns out to not go anywhere. And that's why I feel like many times I'm on a roller coaster of emotions in terms of this search.
Fortunately, he hasn't been alone in this journey, as organizations like Ko-Root have been there alongside him, helping him find related documents and communicate in Korean, a language he doesn't speak. Ko-Root has also been working hard for decades to raise awareness and advocate for better laws protecting adoptees' rights, saying there's still much more that needs to be done.
Normally, when you visit a local office or access the internet, you can easily get a family relations certificate without anyone's permission. But that's not the case for them, as their information is often incomplete. That needs to be restored so that they can find them with just a single click.
As the government also announced last month that Korea has become a contracting party to the Hague Inter-Country Adoption Convention, following an official apology for those who have suffered, more governmental support could follow. That comes as there are known to be around 170,000 people adopted abroad since the Korean War. But alongside these measures, Park says he wants to focus on continuing his search as he is getting older, as well as his biological parents. His final words, if he finally gets to meet them, were these.
You know, I've lived long enough that I recognize life works in mysterious ways, and that I harbor no ill feelings or ill will towards whatever circumstance my birth parents might have been in that had them give me up for adoption. I want to kind of complete, for my own completeness, to understand where I came from, and I hope that they're not afraid to come forward.
박건우, 아리랑뉴스.
In a performance running through Sunday, the Seoul Metropolitan Dance Theater blends the modern and the traditional, reimagining 8 Korean dances with a contemporary twist in his new production Mimesis. Our Pyeong has a story.
Dancers dressed in white choguri shirts with vivid blue and red skirts move gracefully across the stage. Each gesture, down to the tips of their fingers, is deliberate. Their movements are like gentle ripples gliding across a still lake. This is Kyobangmu, the opening scene of Mimesis, a new work unveiled by the Seoul Metropolitan Dance Theater at the Sejong M Theater in Gwanghwamun. After the sold-out success of Ilmu, or One Dance, the troupe returns with Mimesis. It's a reflection on how nature breathes within Korea's traditional dances. The performance reinterprets 8 classic forms, all of which represent a different element of nature, such as the wind that blows through Halyangmu and the lightning that pierces the sky in Changgyemu, with its finale culminating in fire and light.
Our dances are a complete gift set of Korean tradition and folklore. As we explored the essence of each piece, we realized that the flow of nature is deeply embedded within our heritage, that every phenomenon we live with is mirrored in our traditional forms.
The dancers' modernized hanbok are also turning heads. A sheer, form-fitting choguri accentuates the dancers' breathing and movement, while voluminous skirts restore the elegance of traditional silhouettes.
The most distinctive feature of traditional attire is the balance of a slim top and full bottom. I wanted to highlight that contrast to express both structure and vitality.
In each dance, unique accessories accentuate the dancers' movements. And a live orchestra of 9 musicians perform traditional Korean instruments, filling the stage with the deep resonance of Korean rhythm. The production also features star dancer Kim Woo-gun, known from Mnet's dance competition Stage Fighter, whose intense performances in the sword dance Changgyemu and finale Taepyeongmu bring a virtuoso solo performance to this ensemble masterpiece. The first run of Mimesis continues through Sunday at the Sejong M Theater. Pyeong, 아리랑뉴스.
And that brings us to the end of Weekly News Highlights. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your weekend.